In a primetime address to the nation, U.S. President Donald Trump said the Iran war objectives are nearing completion. He added that the U.S. operation will continue until all objectives are met, and suggested that the American military could meet its estimated timeline for concluding operations within 2 to 3 weeks. As gasoline prices continue to rise, the government will tighten vehicle restrictions in the public sector from next Wednesday, introducing a 2-day rotation system. And starting today, the National Energy Crisis Alert has been raised to its second highest level. Also addressing concerns from the Middle East war, President Lee Jae-myung will deliver a speech today for the passage of the government's supplementary budget. He's expected to ask for bipartisan support on the extra budget, worth around 26 trillion Korean won, or roughly $17 billion. Hello and thanks for joining us on Arirang News. In his primetime address just a few hours ago, U.S. President Donald Trump said the war in Iran could end within weeks, amid conflicting claims between Washington and Tehran, raising new questions about where the war is headed. Our Buniran starts us off.
Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks.
In his primetime address on Wednesday, U.S. President Donald Trump touted the progress made by Operation Epic Fury in disabling Iran's Navy, weapons factories, and missile and drone operations. He added that the U.S. operation will continue until all his objectives are met, saying that there could be severe economic pain and instability unless it is guaranteed that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon. Speaking on America's role in the conflict, Trump said the military action is not aimed at securing resources like oil, but at supporting U.S. allies, emphasizing that the U.S. no longer depends on the Middle East for energy. Ahead of this speech, Tehran had firmly denied Trump's claim that Iran is seeking a ceasefire. In a social media post on Wednesday, Trump said Iran's new regime president, whom he did not name, had requested a ceasefire, suggesting that any pause in fighting would depend on the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for global energy supplies. He paired that claim with a warning of heavy strikes if conditions aren't met. But Tehran quickly pushed back. Its foreign ministry dismissed the statement as false and baseless, while the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps insisted the strategic waterway remains firmly under Iranian control and would not be reopened under pressure from Washington. That denial was followed by a direct appeal from Iran's president, who published a letter addressed to the American people just hours before Trump's scheduled address. In it, he questioned the justification for the war and argued that Iran poses no threat to warrant such military action against it. He emphasized that Tehran's actions are rooted in self-defense and suggested the United States is acting on behalf of Israel rather than its own national interest. The letter also underscored that Iran holds no hostility towards ordinary Americans, even as the conflict intensifies. Trump on Wednesday also questioned why the U.S. should secure the Strait of Hormuz, suggesting countries like South Korea, Japan, China, and European nations, which rely heavily on the route, should take on that responsibility instead. 문혜련, Arirang News.
A continuing shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz is sending shockwaves through oil markets. Fuel prices are climbing fast, and the impact is hitting consumers directly. For more, we go live to our correspondent Kim Junong, who's standing by at a gas station in Seoul. Junong, could you elaborate on the situation for us?
Yes, Eunji, I'm standing at a gas station here in Seoul, and even though this place offers lower prices than nearby stations, gasoline and diesel are both in the 1,981 range, approximately $1 and 31 cents per liter. Just a few days ago, this gas station was crowded with drivers lining up to fill their cars. But with fuel prices continuing to climb, the atmosphere is noticeably quieter today. Staff here say the numbers of customers have dropped sharply since last Saturday, since the government's new price cap came into effect. Drivers we managed to speak to say the steady price hikes are becoming harder to ignore. Let's take a listen.
I'm trying to minimize how often I fill up my car, and if it's not really necessary, I use public transportation instead. I also run a restaurant, and it's not just the cost of gas. Ingredient prices have gone up as well, so it's really tough to run a business these days.
I stop by this gas station on my commute because it's usually the cheapest in the area. But even here, prices have jumped a lot today.
Fuel prices in South Korea have been steadily rising over the past week. Today, the nationwide average for gasoline is 1,913 won per liter, an increase of more than 5% compared to a week ago. In Seoul, prices are even higher, at 1,558 won per liter on average. This comes after the government rolled out the second round of its price cap last Friday. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Resources raised the ceiling by 210 won for both gasoline and diesel in response to rising global oil prices. And given a delay of about 2 to 3 weeks before global price changes are reflected at local pumps, prices here are likely to keep rising for now, regardless of short-term moves in global oil markets.
I see. That certainly sounds very concerning. And with the situation escalating right now, the government has raised its alert level for crude oil, right? What does that actually involve?
Right, so the government announced yesterday that it would upgrade the energy security alert for crude oil to the second highest level, which actually took effect at tonight. The system has 4 levels based on the severity of the crisis and its impact on daily life and the economy. Since the onset of the Middle East conflict, the alert has been raised in stages roughly every 2 weeks. The latest move reflects growing concerns over potential supply disruptions. At this elevated level, the government will fully activate its emergency response measures, including securing alternative supplies that bypass the Strait of Hormuz and increasing overseas inflows. At the same time, the government is calling on the public to use less energy. Starting next week, the public sector's vehicle rotation will be tightened from a 5-day to a 2-day system, with an odd-even schedule based on the last digit of a vehicle's license plate. The existing 5-day rotation, which has been in effect since last Wednesday, will remain voluntary for the private sector. That's all I have for now. And back to you, Linji.
All right, Shunho, thank you for the wrap-up. We appreciate it. Consumer prices in South Korea rose to 2.2% in March, up for the first time since January, on the back of higher oil prices triggered by the Middle East conflict. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics this morning, the price of petroleum products surged by just under 10% compared to the year before, marking the fastest rise since October 2022 when the war in Ukraine began. Falling prices for agricultural goods helped ease overall inflation, with the index measuring prices for fresh food falling by more than 6%. Inflation in South Korea had held steady at 2% in both January and February. Meanwhile, President Lee Jae-myung will deliver a speech today for the passage of the government's supplementary budget drawn up in response to the Middle East war. He's expected to outline the uses of the extra budget of around 26 trillion won, or some $17 billion, and ask for bipartisan support to ensure its swift approval. The budget includes funding to help alleviate high fuel costs, including cash assistance and support for the fuel price cap. President Lee Jae-myung has called for the need to upgrade South Korea's partnership with France towards a deeper strategic coordination. In a contribution to French daily Le Figaro, published on Thursday, President Lee stressed the need to bolster bilateral cooperation on AI, nuclear energy, hydrogen, and space technologies, amid increasing global uncertainties. He is set to host his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron tomorrow. This year marks 140 years since the start of Korean-French diplomatic relations. And ahead of French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Seoul, there is a growing call for stronger cooperation between like-minded countries as global uncertainty and conflict continue to grow. Our Oh Soo-young spoke to a Seoul-based expert.
Korea and France have much room to deepen security ties, from nuclear submarines to middle power cooperation. That's according to the Sejong Institute's Vice President Chung Song-jang, ahead of French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Korea on Thursday, upon the 140th year of bilateral relations. Chung says security should be at the front and center of bilateral talks, with a focus on nuclear-powered submarines. Seoul aims to develop its own, a move US President Donald Trump endorsed in his summit with President Lee Jae-myung last year. But hurdles remain in their bilateral nuclear agreement and US control over nuclear fuel and technology. Here France offers a different path, which could also overcome proliferation concerns.
France built its submarines on technology entirely independent from the US, meaning US approval is not needed. And as France uses low-enriched uranium, the same grade used in civilian power plants, you simply cannot make a nuclear weapon from it.
A potential partnership could also have commercial promise.
If Korea, the world's second-largest shipbuilding powerhouse, joins hands with France, France could become a hub for the MRO market in Europe. This could also serve as a strategic gateway for Korea's expansion into the European market. What France lacks, shipbuilding, infrastructure, ammunition production, Korea can provide. While France can offer operational know-how, expertise in enrichment and reprocessing,
Chung says it's a crucial moment when countries like Korea and France must strengthen their own capabilities in the face of shared threats and vulnerabilities. For one, the US is no longer making extended deterrence commitments to allies as clearly as before. This, he said, makes the case for a new consultative body of 5 middle power countries, not to replace, but complement the US-led order.
Middle powers like Korea, France, Japan, Germany, and Britain can yield considerable force if they work together as the world's 5th through 8th ranked military powers. Korea is considered 5th in conventional military power. It is also a leading force in semiconductors and smartphones. France has nuclear weapons and nuclear-powered submarines. So does Britain, which also has strength in intelligence. Japan has the world's 3rd largest shipbuilding industry, while Germany has major economic and defense capabilities.
With France having invited Korea to the G7 Leaders Summit this year, such middle power alignment could growingly gain traction. Xi and Macron's bilateral talks this week are expected to cover economic and industrial to security and cultural cooperation. Macron's visit to Korea will mark his first since taking office and the first by a French president in 11 years. Oh Seong, Arirang News.
South Korean automakers Hyundai Motor and Kia posted record first-quarter results in the U.S. despite a slight dip in March sales, driven by strong demand for eco-friendly vehicles and SUVs. Hyundai Motor America reported March sales of 84,087 units, down 3% from a year earlier, largely due to a high base effect from unusually strong pre-demand ahead of anticipated U.S. auto tariffs. However, strong momentum in January and February lifted Hyundai's first-quarter sales to 205,388 units, up 1% on year, marking its highest-ever first-quarter performance. Kia also achieved a record quarter, with sales rising 0.8% from the same period last year. On the cultural front, the creators behind the global hit K-pop Demon Hunters are in Seoul, meeting the press following their Oscar triumph, while also teasing a potential sequel. Our culture correspondent Park Gun-woo tells us more.
Fresh off their Oscar triumphs, the team returns to Korea with multiple golden statuettes, as expectations soar following the official announcement of a sequel. Director Maggie Gang says she's currently working on the storyline, now in early development, while keeping details to a minimum and avoiding spoilers.
My fellow director Chris and I will be making the kind of movie we'd want to see, as we did the first time. So, stay tuned. It will be even more eventful, at an even greater scale. As for the music, I still want to showcase Korean trot alongside heavy metal.
The Koreanness is the soul of the movie on every level. Combination of really grounding it in the culture, but also breaking rules everywhere. I think we'll try to do that. And in my experience of Korean culture and Korean people is that they've been through a lot. And there's a pride and a strength and a sense of unity that I think is really moving. And
Director Maggie Gang also recalled the moment she captured the first ever Best Animated Feature Oscar for a filmmaker of Korean heritage.
I have felt this as as a Korean myself, not feeling completely Korean. And now that we have reached this kind of a global market, especially in entertainment, I do think a lot of us, like myself and EJ, who kind of are skirting both cultures, we are the ones who will be bridging that gap between cultures, whether it's Korean or not.
The film's success was shared by its music team as well, including singer-songwriter EJ, who performed at the 98th Academy Awards after collecting an Oscar.
I never imagined it would become so globally viral, especially since I was made fun of for loving K-pop when I was younger. At the Oscars, seeing all the filmmakers singing along while holding light sticks as we performed with traditional Korean music, including pansori, made me so proud that I burst into tears.
With the music team also showing positivity over featuring more Korean-style music, including Try, expectations are higher than ever. And with that in mind, KPop Demon Hunters 2 is set to be released around 2029 to once again spotlight K-culture on the global stage. 박건우, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. President Donald Trump has warned that he may pull the United States out of NATO, blaming European allies for refusing to send warships to reopen the Strait of Hormuz amid the ongoing U.S. war with Iran. Speaking to Reuters on Wednesday, Trump said he would address the nation to express his disgust with NATO, confirming he was absolutely considering withdrawal. Hours earlier, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declined to reaffirm U.S. commitment to Article 5, the core guarantee that an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all. Other NATO members responded to the comments. Poland urged calm and said there is no NATO without the United States. Germany reaffirmed its commitment to the alliance, and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said London would strengthen economic and defense ties with Europe, regardless of Washington's next move. Security analysts warn that repeated U.S. threats against the alliance give Russia grounds to test whether collective defense commitments still hold. The United States on Wednesday lifted sanctions against Venezuelan interim President Delcy Rodriguez. This clears the way for her government to reclaim control of Venezuela's state-owned oil assets in the U.S., including refiner Citgo Petroleum. The Rodriguez government is reportedly already preparing to take over the boards of Venezuela's U.S.-based oil subsidiaries, assets that opposition-appointed supervisors have controlled since 2019. Rodriguez called the decision a step toward normalizing relations and urged Washington to lift all remaining sanctions on Venezuela. Since U.S. forces seized former President Nicolas Maduro in a raid at the start of the year, Washington has formally recognized Rodriguez as Venezuela's leader, sent cabinet officials to Caracas alongside potential investors, and reached an agreement for the U.S. to purchase Venezuelan oil. For the first time in U.S. history, a sitting president walked into the Supreme Court to watch his own policy go on trial. President Donald Trump sat in the courtroom on Wednesday as justices challenged the legal foundation of his executive order to restrict birthright citizenship. Chief Justice John Roberts called the administration's reading of the 14th Amendment code quirky. Justice Neil Gorsuch, a Trump appointee, said the government's position was difficult to square with an 1898 Supreme Court precedent on birthright citizenship. The court is expected to rule on the case by end of June. NASA's Artemis II mission lifted off from Kennedy Space Center in Florida on Wednesday. The 10-day journey around the moon will send humans deeper into space than ever before. NASA astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, and Christina Koch, along with Canadian astronaut Jeremy Henson, lifted off just before sunset aboard the Space Launch System rocket. 3.5 hours into flight, the crew will take manual control of the Orion capsule to test the steering and maneuverability. That is the first of dozens of test objectives planned throughout the mission. Artemis II is a critical step toward NASA's first crewed lunar landing since 1972, which the agency targets for 2028. Chu Ji-han, Arirang News.
With the recent stretch of warm weather, cherry blossoms in Seoul officially reached full bloom yesterday. In fact, one of the well-known spring festivals, the Yeouido Spring Flower Festival, will run for 5 days starting tomorrow, offering a great chance to enjoy the peak of the season. Meanwhile, temperatures continue to show a wide range between morning and afternoon, so make sure to dress in layers. However, air quality remains an issue, especially in western parts of Korea. Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province will remain in the bad range for ultrafine dust throughout the day today. And as westerly winds bring in additional dust from abroad, levels will rise even further. And this afternoon, Seoul will be getting up to 18 degrees Celsius. Daegu and Busan will top out at 20 degrees under sunny skies nationwide. Then another round of spring rain is expected nationwide from tomorrow night through Saturday afternoon.
That's all we have for today's noon edition of Arirang News. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Stay tuned.